Good morning and welcome into a Friday edition of Duval Rundown. I am Mia O'Brien. It is Friday in Duval County, and that, my friends, can mean only one thing. It's time for another guest Friday edition of Duval Rundown. My friend Evan Closky will join us here momentarily from 10 Tampa Bay. He has spent the last 4 years covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from the times of Byron Leftwich and Tom Brady through the 1-year Dave Canales, Baker Mayfield experiment of sorts that obviously went pretty well. And then finally, last season, when Liam Coen was leading Todd Bowles' offense. Of course, before we get to that interview, want to let you guys know that, number one, we are nearing 5,000 subscribers on the 1010XL Jaguars YouTube channel. So make sure you like and subscribe to this video as well as all of the other great content that we have coming here on the 1010XL Jaguars YouTube channel. Of course, you can find exclusive interviews from OTAs as well as clips from practices, segments from our shows on 1010XL, and oh so much more. Also want to remind you guys that Duval Rundown is always available on demand here on YouTube as well as at the 1010XL Podcast Network. Perhaps you're catching this on demand and you're listening to it wherever you get your podcasts. For those of you tuning in live here on this fine Friday morning, May the 30th, be sure to leave a comment in the YouTube chat. We'll get to some questions after my time with Evan, but I really think you guys are going to enjoy this conversation. We did pre-record it, so I apologize that there won't be any live Q&A with Evan, but you guys are really going to enjoy this one, and then we'll discuss it afterwards. So stick with us here on Duval Rundown. Here is my good friend on a guest Friday, Evan Closky. A pleasure to be joined. Yet another Friday, guest Friday, and I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Evan Closky, 10 Tampa Bay Sports Director. Thank you so much for hopping on your maiden voyage on Duval Rundown, sir.
Well, I appreciate you, and let me say this publicly because I texted you already, but congratulations on the engagement. Very excited for you.
Thank you. I'm very glad.
We're wearing one of these.
I'm very glad that I actually have the ring today. When we did the Duval Rundown on Wednesday with Hayes Carline, it was actually at the shop getting refitted, but picked it up, and now we're ready to rumble. So
there we go.
We got the bling bling. And Liam Coen's offense had the bling bling last year, Evan. You had a chance to, of course, cover the 2024 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You've been in Tampa Town now about 3-4 years. Correct me if I'm wrong. And
yes,
so
2021.
There we go. So 4 seasons. So you've seen the evolution of that team from the Tom Brady era with Byron Leftwich as the OC to the Dave Canales 1-year experiment to the 1 year of Liam Coen. And I think that's a really good place to start because you've joined us on Helmets and Heels and you've said this, and I know you're about to say it again. The offense that Liam Coen ran in Tampa, number one, was his only year as a play calling offensive coordinator. So we don't know if it's actually indicative of what he wants to do because secondly, Liam Coen was very open with the reporters down in Tampa Town that he had to change the entire offensive plan that he went into his 1 year in the Tampa area planning on running.
Yeah. So that's the thing. If you are a defensive coordinator studying what the Bucs did last year, which obviously you're going to have to do a little bit to pick up some Liam Coen things, but it's not going to be a copy and paste job of like, oh, the Bucs ran all of this last year. The Jaguars are going to take a bunch of that and run it with this team. That's not the case. Liam Coen, the entire training camp, when we watched this team, it was 11 personnel. 11 personnel, they wanted to run 11 personnel, and then injuries and all this stuff, and they realized they couldn't run 11 personnel anymore. And so really the back half, so in the beginning of the year, they were running the offense that they thought was going to be successful in the 11 personnel, but the running game was not as successful. So then they had to tinker some things around to accommodate the running game. And when they started to kind of get flowing there, then Chris Godwin goes down for the season, Mike Evans gets hurt. They really were duct tape and bubble gum for a while there. Cade Otton became wide receiver 1 for a period. And coming out of the bye week, Liam Coen really simplified things and said, hey, who are our best players? And let's make sure that our best players are on the field. So it's not even a case of like, what do we want to do in this and that? It was just more of like, we got to get Bucky Irving the ball more. How can we get him on the field? And it was really just trying to survive week by week and being as creative as possible. So when I look back at his 1 year in Tampa, the number one thing that you point to with Liam is this was the 4th best scoring offense. And he was able to maintain that season-long statistic despite some really huge hurdles. And I will say it does help that this team has a really good offensive line. I don't know if Jacksonville is able to compete with what Tampa Bay has in the trenches. So that gives you some more margin for error. And the team did lose about a touchdown when Chris and Mike went out. So it wasn't like, oh man, he like made it all sing again. Like, no, they got by. The defense just stunk and couldn't really cover up the tracks of how good the offense was. But don't look at the Bucs last season and think that, hey, if we put this person here and that person there and this person here, boom, we got a preview of what the Jags are going to look like. No, he's going to mold the Jaguars and this offense the way that it needs to be for 2025. And that might look drastically different than what he's going to plan for this team in 2026.
And that concludes today's podcast. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, Evan. Since you brought up the offensive line, you can't read my chicken scratch of my notes, but the first note that I had written down was offensive line, because I do think that the tackles were so paramount to everything that the Bucs did last year, whether that was pass protection or the run game itself. Walker Little and Anton Harrison are two of the expected returning starters. And I know that there's been a lot made about the competition that there will be across the board here in Duval County come training camp. But ultimately, I just think that it doesn't matter what your skill players look like. It doesn't matter what scheme you're running. When you go from Tristan Wirfs to any player, and this is with all due respect to Walker Little and Anton Harrison, who I respect and I'm friends with, I think, hopefully still after this podcast, there's just obviously such a significant downgrade. And I can also say that because I'm also friends with Tristan Wirfs and have covered him since he was 15 years old. But the point is, Evan, and this is something that I reported last year during the season, and it has certainly come up in the last few weeks, in terms of protections, in terms of pass sets, in terms of, hey, because we've placed an emphasis on running the ball, and so our 5 offensive linemen aren't dropping back 50 times a game, what do you make of how Liam Coen maximizes his offensive line? And to your point, it may look very different than it did last year, but what did he do last year to keep those guys fresh and keep them involved?
Well, he actually is really good at, tight ends are really important in this offense. And it's not, I think fans always think about the offensive production from tight ends, but the blocking is sometimes the most important thing. And there's certain guys who don't really need to catch balls and need to make sure that they cover the things for certain runs. And I think that he's very creative in zone. He can run gap, zone, whatever it might be. And he also understands what the offensive linemen need to do. He also understands how moving certain players in motion will create sort of a pseudo chip in ways. So, he's going to utilize motion a ton. We know that will carry over from one year to the next. But I go back to the line there when Justin School was put in that left tackle or that right tackle position for Luke Gedeke, who went down. And that game was really a nightmare for Liam. I thought that was sort of like a welcome to the NFL moment for him. Maybe a little bit of stubbornness. Hey, we're going to leave our guy on an island. I trust him against Aiden Hutchinson. And School got completely manhandled in that game. And I think he walked away from that experience saying, I can't really do that again. I got to create my chip plans. I got to do all that stuff. And moving forward, he is going to utilize running backs, tight ends, motion, all these things to create the chips necessary to make sure that the rushing game is well, but also pass protecting, making sure that you create enough time for your quarterback. And we can get into, ADOT and all that stuff of how you got to be a quick processor and get the ball out. And that might limit some of the deep plays.
Before we get to ADOT, before we get to this notion of, the Jags are going to throw it all around the yard. Maybe not, because maybe it's going to be the quick passing attack, perhaps, that defines this offense. I do want to discuss the tight end play in Tampa last year. Cade Otton's breakout game came in week 15 against the Los Angeles Chargers. You can make the argument, Evan, that was the game. He had they ran 13 personnel, I should say, 15 times in that victory over LA. Up to that point, weeks 1 through 14, Liam Coen and the Bucs ran 13 personnel, a grand total of 23 times. And so obviously the matchup with that defense with Jesse Minter and company, who of course, you as an Ohio State Buckeye, you are very familiar with the now former Michigan defense coordinator. I had to get that dig out there. That may or may not
we're coming off a national championship. We cool.
We cool. But yeah, for them to run 13 personnel 23 total times, weeks 1 through 14, and then that week say, nope, we need to lean all the way into it. A, it reinforces what we already discussed, players over plays. But B, what happens after that? Does Cade Otton then become this fixture of the offense? Does the tight end play in the receiving game suddenly change overnight the rest of the season?
Well, my thing is with Cade specifically, and I know that Strange is probably going to be somebody who is going to have a big emphasis entering this season for the Jags. But with Cade, he's kind of the guy that doesn't make mistakes. He's not overly athletic, but you can depend on him. So with Cade is very matchup specific. So I always kind of say with fantasy advice, like rostering Cade Otton, you really week in and week out, it all depends whether you want to play him or not, because some weeks he is going to be more of a blocker, some weeks he's going to be more of a passer. And that's really Liam Coen. I don't think he pigeonholes the tight end position into one certain way. Now, I will say, like Cade is, if they're going to run receiver type plays for their tight end, Cade's probably going to be the one to catch it. And Payne Durham's likely going to be the blocker. And Devin Culp is going to have to probably be the Cade Otton fill-in, which he was last year when Otton got hurt. So that's part of depth, and really James Gladstone and how Liam are going to have to work together to really build out the roster, because, Tampa Bay Liam came into a really good situation. They were a team that on the defensive side was not deep at all, but offensively speaking, they had a lot of weapons, maybe not at wide receiver as deep, but everywhere else they were covered. And so he was able to do a lot more. I am curious how he's going to work with that tight end room in Jacksonville and how creative he can get with them and figuring out what parts work, because he was able to deploy 3 tight ends if necessary. I don't know if that's going to be something in his back pocket he can necessarily do this year.
Yeah, especially with the 3 veteran free agent signings that are all regarded as blocking tight ends. Although I was as I told him last week when I spoke with him, I was pretty high on Hunter Long coming out of BC. Thought there maybe was some, dare I say, George Kittle type qualities to his game, or at the very least, an inline blocker who can certainly flex out if you need to and catch the ball a time or two. You brought up average depth of throw. And that is where I think is a good starting point for this idea, again, of the Bucs ran a short passing attack. This was not an offense that was predicated on an offensive line that could hold up. Their average time to throw for Baker Mayfield last year was 2.77 seconds, which was 33rd in the National Football League. It was not predicated on, well, we're going to hold the line for 5-6 seconds and he's going to have all day for the receivers and the play to develop, and then he can throw the ball downfield. Yes, Mike Evans had 4 touchdowns, over 20 yards or more. Jalen McMillan had 3. But at the same time, Chris Godwin, in a shortened season, 4 touchdowns, Evan, from 10 yards or less away from the end zone, which I think speaks to that overarching narrative of the short passing game and extension of the run game, but also philosophically part of the offense that was created in Tampa last year.
Yeah, and look at Sean McVay, right? He comes from that tree. They're not really out there trying to throw the ball deep. Now, I will say something Jacksonville has that the Bucs really don't. Brian Thomas Jr. is somebody who can really stretch the field. And like Trey Palmer out here, I mean, he could be on his way out. They just drafted Tez Johnson. They didn't really have that home run hitter. Now, BTJ is way more than a home run hitter. He kind of does it all, and I'm super high on him. Really excited to see how he works with Liam. But the bread and butter is going to be working short, underneath, quickly, because that's just philosophically how that tree works. And as you said, extension of the run game, it's just a bunch of jabs before you throw the knockout punch. And a lot of times you got to pick your spots, and Liam is pretty good at understanding where you can take those shots. Again, I go back to that Lions game. Go look at the Chris Godwin touchdown that he had and the design there. They knew entering the week that they were going to have that wide open. You don't just deploy that right away. You set up some plays, and then you know exactly when to use it. And then, boom, a monster 30-plus yard touchdown from a guy who usually doesn't do it. So, it's very hard to box Liam Coen into a certain thought. But philosophically, it's not like Trevor's going to go back there and he's going to let him turn the ball over a bunch of times. Like, that's just not the case. You're going to have to work underneath quickly, screens, slants, all this stuff, and really start utilizing Trevor in different ways when you can start getting the defense a little bit off kilter. And that's what I would expect.
Speaking of Trevor, Evan, this idea of him having to change his footwork and that the hitch matching the release, matching each read, the progressions, is that something that Baker Mayfield was vocal about this time a year ago, that maybe he had to modify his game a little bit too?
It's interesting because Baker actually, with that stuff, I think he went through a lot of it with Dave Canales.
Okay.
And while Liam Coen had his own offense here, foundationally, at least with from Dave, who was a QB coach, who just ascended super quickly, a lot of those fundamentals were kind of done there, and that was part of Baker's growth 2 years ago before Liam even got into town. I would argue that Liam's biggest job with Baker was to hold him back. Like, dude, I know you're a dog, but like, I need you sometimes to think about the smart play, not about the home run hitter or taking that shot or, trying to be the hero. And even one of the offensive coaches, when we were able to meet with all of them, said, Thad Lewis, the QB coach, said sometimes he felt like, oh, there, I've fallen down.
I saw it coming, and we saw it coming. It's all right. This is the beauty of live video.
I'm getting excited. Thad Lewis said that there were sometimes he thought he had to play hero. And I think that, like, Trevor is more foundationally sound than what Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield's more fun to watch, don't get me wrong, but Trevor's not going to do the things that Baker does. And in some respects, that doesn't help you in like third down, got to have it situations. But in most respects, I would argue that Liam's going to have a little bit of an easier job with Trevor of saying, hey, this is what we're doing, stick to the game plan. I think there's a little bit more ad-libbing with Baker. But ultimately, I didn't feel like when Liam got in, they had to really tinker too much with what he was doing with footwork, because I felt like that work was already put in a year ahead of time.
Got you. One more on the quarterback position, Evan. Last season, Baker Mayfield ranked third among starting NFL quarterbacks in completion percentage on play action. He was fifth on non-play action plays. You spoke earlier about the motion, this idea of perhaps the picture looks one way at the snap. When the quarterback turns his back to the offensive line, to the line of scrimmage, it can look completely different. And this offense last year was A-OK with using that sort of misdirection and this idea of an evolving play, as opposed to, okay, we're lined up at the line of scrimmage at the snap, and this is exactly what we're going to look like when we actually go into our release.
The best part about Liam Coen's system is that his plays can also devolve into totally different plays, right? But they all look the same. And the number one compliment that Baker Mayfield and this offense had when Liam Coen came in versus Dave Canales was that when they got up to the line of scrimmage, they didn't feel like they were screwed with the play call and had to run it knowing that they were going to have a failed play. So you get multiple plays into the line of scrimmage, and that's Liam's philosophy. Hey, I want to empower the players. This is their offense. I'm going to give you some direction. I'm going to throw you some plays. But ultimately, on Trevor, it's going to be your call to say, this is what we do. When you walk up to the line of scrimmage and you see how they're lining up, you can check out of it. You can go to this. You can go to that. So there, and the play call that it will allow you to do 3 things or 4 things, and you can evolve off of that as the season goes on. That's what makes Sean McVay, Liam Coen, everybody from this tree so hard to plan against, because one picture one week is going to look totally different the next week, even though the pictures are the same. So that's really the key, I think, with Liam, is that you get multiple plays into the line of scrimmage, and that Trevor's going to have more control probably than he's ever had in his life at the line of scrimmage to really take ownership of this offense. So there shouldn't be any excuses from Trevor about, how the season goes, because he should have a direct correlation to it.
Let's finish with the run game. Evan, let's go big 30,000 foot view first. Why was the run game in the final seasons of Byron Leftwich's tenure in Tampa, and even the 1 year of Dave Canales, why did the run game not work, and why did it work in 2024 under Liam Coen?
The best thing I could say about Byron, and I respect him, he is super smart at football, but it's just like the equivalent of people who yell at baseball nerds for saying analytics are stupid, right? It's just like, at some point, man, you got to adapt the analytics. You got to understand, because teams are ahead of you and they have more information. The well ran dry for Byron Leftwich. The fact is, he didn't know how to adjust anymore. And what made Byron so successful with Bruce Arians in that offense was the fact that they had Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, and Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, and Leonard Fournette at his peak. And you had like a stout offensive line. Like, they were so good. It didn't matter what you ran. You and I could have been calling plays. We would have had a great offense. So Byron, when the talent started depleting a little bit, so did the play, because they didn't know how to overcome that with scheme and creativity. When Dave came in, Dave was stubborn, and he said he was going to be stubborn, and he remained stubborn, and it led to bad results. And he wanted to be a zone running scheme, and he really did not want to alter out of that. He believed that if we kept doing it, if we kept practicing it, repetition, eventually it's going to get better. This is what I want to run. But it wasn't smart. And when Liam came in, he also wanted to run zone, but he also realized that our best running plays were gap scheme. And so he leaned into the gap runs, and the gap runs were wildly successful for somebody definitely like Bucky Irving, who feasted off those numbers. So when you're looking at the numbers and you're like, oh my God, we're one of the best teams with gap runs, why don't we just run more gap runs? So they didn't abandon the zone rushing scheme. It's just we got to run more gap in certain spots, and that led to a lot of success. So I would say that the biggest thing is just Liam being objective about the offense, what works, and leaning into what works versus saying, this is my system, this is what I want to run, we're going to do it until we have perfected it.
I can't guarantee that Baker Mayfield will be Bucky Irving, especially with a couple of the clips in the film study that I did prior to this podcast, Evan. Just because Bucky Irving was so effective in pass pro even. I was watching this clip from the Chargers game where he's taking on Khalil Mack, and while, yes, the guard slides to help him, you don't see a rookie doing things like that. And obviously that's week 15, so at that point in time, he has the full confidence of Liam Coen and the staff. But certainly that is going to be something that these running backs are asked to do, because much like the tight ends and the importance of wide receivers blocking in Liam Coen, Sean McVay's offense, it's going to be equally important for running backs in pass protection, which is partially why I think they drafted LaKent Allen out of Syracuse in the 7th round, a second running back, because he was regarded as one of the better pass protectors at the running back position in college last year.
Yeah, and I think that I am curious. My one question, outsider looking into Liam, is how his scheme, how his creativity, how his brilliant mind is going to be able to elevate the talent around him, because I don't think the Jags are quite there yet. I think they have a lot of good pieces. But again, I think in the national discussion about the Buccaneers, I really don't think they're given enough respect on the amount of depth they have and how the pieces are all kind of in place here. Like, Liam didn't have to do much. There wasn't like, oh my God, like maybe the tight end room needed to be a little bit better. Certainly when he lost Chris and Mike, that was a problem. But ultimately it was like, man, I got this world-class offensive line. I got 2 Buccaneer Ring of Honor members plus 1 certified Hall of Famer at wide receiver. You know, I got this stud rookie running back, and I also got Rachaad White, who can block. It was one of the best third down blockers, I think, in the league. The other stuff, maybe I'm not so high on, but he can certainly block on third down. There's just a lot of things where I don't know if the Jags personnel is quite there yet. So that's going to be like my biggest question is, how much can you elevate the talent around him? And I'm bullish on Liam. I just don't know how like year 1 is fully going to go. So I'm certainly buying stock, but that's like my biggest question.
Yeah. One more on the running backs, and then you have some intel that you want to share with the Duval Rundown listeners, which I'm very excited to hear about from boots on the ground in Tampa Town. Pony personnel, 21 personnel, 2 running backs on the field. All of our contemporaries who are in the weeds, in film study, in reviewing offensive design, they are obsessed with Liam Coen, much like Mike McDaniel's ability to adapt to that personnel. For you covering the team in Tampa, does this come out of the blue? Is this a midseason development, much like the tight end play? Or is this something that from the onset, he wanted to have 2 running backs on the field at all times?
So the cool thing about Liam Coen, we always knew about the pony personnel pretty early, but the pony personnel looked the same, and we just wanted more of it. So in the first handful of weeks, when we looked at the pony personnel, it was like, man, they like, I forget the numbers because it's been so long now, but it was like, holy crap, they are like munching yards in pony personnel, in this 21 personnel. And so it was like, man, they should be doing more of that. And they really weren't leaning into it too much. They were kind of picking and choosing and just munching the huge yards that came with it. Off the top of my head, I remember like a 50-plus yard run against Atlanta that Thursday night from Rachaad White. That was something out of pony personnel. And then after the bye week was really when he was like hey, we just need to put our best players on the field. That's when I saw the creativity of the pony personnel. Go back to the Giants game. If you want to look at pony personnel, like just masterclass, watch where Bucky and Rashad are in that game because they're split out wide. They're, in between, or one's on each of the other, with Baker Mayfield there in the middle, which was normal. Then there was like this cable car thing where Rashad was behind Bucky. And so there's so much more to the pony package that's available, that's possible. You obviously need the horses that can do it because the problem is with the defenses, with Bucky and Rashad, they can catch the ball and they can run the ball fairly effectively. The one issue that Liam ran into was that his pony package had a tell. I believe that he was running one way. I think it was like a misdirection. That when they would do pony personnel, if they were running, it was going to be, go one way and or fake one way, go to the other. And teams were on to the misdirection of it. So I think there was some sort of tell that came out of it, and I'm sure he'll adjust moving forward. But yeah, that was sort of like big picture of pony personnel. Me watching that and like really salivating over it was just the beauty of it, how successful it was, how creative he got, and then how teams finally learned some tendencies.
And then, of course, they were also able to implement that quick passing attack from that 21 personnel and disguise it completely. And you think, oh, well, they got 2 running backs on the field. They got to be running. No, we're actually going to drop back. We're going to hit Cade Otton over the middle. We're going to hit Jalen McMillan over the middle. What a world. Misdirection, pre-snap motion. Those are things that I've joked, Evan, in reading Mike Silver's book, The Why Is Now, or The Why Is Everything, excuse me. It is fascinating to me that, these discoveries were made in the halls in Virginia for the Washington Redskins circa 2012 and implemented in Atlanta right up the road from here in 2016 when Kyle Shanahan was the OC. And yet here we are 9 years later, finally, at long last, making their way to Duval County. Before we get out of here, Evan, you had a chance to catch up with some of the Bucs offensive linemen. The hatchet has been buried, folks. There are no hard feelings when it comes to Liam Coen leaving Tampa for Jacksonville. Additionally, there was some high praise for a now Jaguar former Buc. Tell me more, Evan.
Yeah, Robert Hainsey is somebody who is going to play center there in Jacksonville. And I would argue that on the offensive line, right, like center isn't the most talked about position come draft time of like, hey, you don't want to waste a first round pick on a center. But having a really knowledgeable center, a capable center is so vitally important to the offensive line. When Graham Barton came in last year, Robert Hainsey knew his job was taken, right? Now, there's one of two ways you can take that. You can be, mopey and upset and want to get traded and all those things, or you can be a really good teammate. And that's what Robert Hainsey was. Graham Barton spoke with the media earlier this week and was just so complimentary, like went out of his way to say, like, I can't emphasize this enough of how important Robert Hainsey was to my growth and development, just learning how to play in the NFL, learning these little nuances. And, Hainsey obviously wanted to play, which is why he moved on from Tampa Bay, because it was going to be a backup job here. And going with Liam Coen made so much sense because Liam Coen was somebody who would call up Robert Hainsey in the middle of the night to double check on protections to make sure that this made sense. So Jacksonville is getting a really, really smart dude. And I also think that Robert Hainsey, again, go back to the Atlanta Falcons game. I think it was the Falcons game on the road that Thursday night that Barton didn't play. Hainsey looked pretty good in this Liam Coen system. You got to remember that Hainsey lost his job under Dave Canales, under Byron. When Ryan Jensen went down, he never should have played as early as he did. Ryan Jensen went down. Then I don't think Hainsey really works as well in a zone rushing scheme, but in gap where there's more moving and you got to be more mobile, he really is effective. So I think you're going to see in a average to maybe at his best above average center in the league. But what he does in that room, especially for a room that's going to have to learn how to gel together because there are new moving parts, you have the calm and the storm there at center who's going to know all the answers because he's been through it and has been there with Liam Coen for a full year plus now, counting the offseason. So I cannot understate the importance of, or I cannot overstate the importance of what Robert Hainsey means to that Jaguars offensive line room, because even now that he's gone from the Bucs O-line room, they're still talking about him and how great of a teammate and how smart he was in developing those game plans. So they really do have a great piece there. Ceiling is probably a little bit limited, but you get a super high floor out of him.
And the feedback I know I've gotten around here, Evan, has been that while he was very gracious to Graham Barton, this is a guy who, when he steps onto a football field, he's a dog. He's got that edge to him that maybe is a little prickly to some, but that's that competitive fire that
he's played with Tom Brady. That matters too.
Right. He's played with Tom
Brady. Go ask him
Brady
about the baby powder.
Ooh, the baby powder. Okay. All right.
Tom Brady had a very specific routine for his centers that Robert Hainsey had to learn on the fly. I'm sure he'll give you a great story about that.
Oh, boy. Okay. I'm very excited for that. But point being, with all due respect to Mitch Morse, with all due respect to Luke Fortner, who is still here in Jacksonville, they're technicians. And Robert Hainsey, while he's a high IQ player, I would argue he's someone who plays with more of that physical edge than he does, hey, I understand my physical limitations, and so I have to compensate with knowing where every single person on the field is and how I can move my body best in order to compensate against the competition.
Yeah, you're not going to really complain too much about Robert Hainsey, certainly not effort-wise. As I said, he's a little bit smaller, which does hurt his ceiling. If he was built like Graham Barton, we'd be talking about, a Pro Bowler, all-pro type of guy. It's just he's a little bit limited, as you said. But, I don't think that that's going to hurt him. I think that offense works really well to his strengths. And getting him on the move a little bit, I think really does make him an excellent center versus just running zone and just trying to body up some of these monster humans there in the trenches. I don't think you're working smart with your personnel. That's I think what Liam Coen sees, and he's going to make sure that rushing attack really works well for his offensive line, and that's going to meld it well to Hainsey and finding ways to be successful there.
And to your point, maybe his predecessors in Tampa did not do that when it came to the run game. It was square peg, circle hole, come hell or come high water.
Yeah.
On the record / just to clarify, Evan, this idea of Hainsey, certainly we know lost his job to Graham Barton, which there's no knock on that. Graham Barton has 5 position versatility, one of my favorites in the 2024 NFL draft class. But in terms of his play with Tom Brady, in terms of his play with Baker year one, I mean, it was pretty smooth sailing, right? I know you alluded to the Ryan Jensen of it all, because that obviously played a factor too.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when Hainsey played, he was a little bit overmatched in some of the games. He knew what to do. He never made mistakes. It was just sometimes he got overpowered, which then created more pressure in the pocket. Or maybe, if you keep running the ball up the middle with Hainsey, who's dealing with these monster humans, when that's not his strength, you're going to have negative runs. So I would have to go back to some of the plays. I think the runs towards Hainsey were not great in those previous seasons. But again, round peg, square hole, the system wasn't built for the players, I thought. And Dave was learning on the job too that first year. And my number one complaint about Dave, who did a great job here in Tampa, by the way. There's a reason why he got a head coaching job. But my biggest complaint about Dave when he was offensive coordinator here was he was too stubborn, didn't adjust to what the numbers were telling us, what we can watch. He just wanted to run his system. So that was my thing with Hainsey. And yeah, I mean, Graham Barton. Look, I think Graham Barton is a potential all-pro. Graham Barton's going to be a dude in this league. If not next year, the year after. He is somebody who I would buy right now and say that at least in the NFC, he's going to be a top 3 center. And he's just got such a high ceiling because he also is ridiculously smart. Duke education, he did public policy and interned. Dude is brilliant. Having conversations with him, it's just oh my God, he's talking about wanting to break down trees with offensive coordinators. So, but yeah, Hainsey, I think that Jaguar fans are going to really like Hainsey. And with all the changes you have up there, I don't imagine you're going to be pointing a finger saying we got to fix that.
I told you I needed you for 15 minutes. You've given us double and then some of that time. Evan Closky, 10 Tampa Bay, always on call for us here at 1010XL and Duval Rundown. Appreciate you hopping on, brother man.
I got you anytime. You know that.
All righty. Our thanks again to the one and only Evan Closky for joining us here on this Friday edition of Duval Rundown. We did record that episode, or that podcast interview, I should say, yesterday, because Evan, of course, does have responsibilities as the sports director at Channel 10 in the Tampa area. And of course, you should follow all of his great coverage if you want to check him out on X or any other good social channels. Yes, his handle is eClosky, WTSP. Promised you guys. Oh yeah. Also by the this way. I gotta get my left from my right. I promise I'll get that down at some point in time. He gives great wedding advice. I think Evan was the first person to text me after I got engaged this week and was like, here's the rundown. And of course, this is coming from someone who just got back from a 2-week honeymoon through Hawaii, New Zealand. Go check out his Instagram too. Evan is awesome, and we really, really appreciate his time here on this fine Friday. All right, as promised, let's get to a couple of questions here on Duval Rundown. I know you guys have been chiming in throughout the course of today's episode live. Of course, some of you are listening on demand as well. And if you aren't listening on demand, but you want to, make sure you do so with all of our previous episodes previously here on Duval Rundown. All right, here is one from King David on YouTube. What do y'all think of the Etienne situation, or should we keep him? I am fine either way. Ultimately, as you have heard Liam Coen say multiple times at the podium, as you just heard Evan Closky, who just spent the last year plus with Liam Coen, say, because of the emphasis on the run game, I just cannot come off of this idea of Liam Coen wants to have all of the available resources to maximize this offensive line and this run game as possible. Travis Etienne is a factor in that. Additionally, I think as a pass catcher, and I know somebody, I believe it was Robert, later in today's episode noted, if you go back to the Pittsburgh Steelers matchup week 6 or week 8, I guess it was technically, in the 2023 season, the Etienne wheel route touchdown against the Steelers up in Western Pennsylvania, he can certainly stretch the field vertically out of the backfield as well. That's a fun little wrinkle. And while, yes, Baker Mayfield has shown that ability as well during his time at Virginia Tech, we've seen him, at least in practice. And again, it's just t-shirts and helmets right now for the OTA phase 3 portion of the offseason program, but certainly he is getting a little bit of work catching the ball in individual drills. And so could you see that role be usurped by Tootin from Etienne? I just come back to, I think that Liam Coen is going to want a stable of running backs, King David, and he is going to want to have a rotation. And I think all 4 of those guys, you can throw Keelan Robinson in as the 5th if you want as well. I don't think they're going to carry 5. But this idea of every single running back on that roster, including the undrafted free agent rookie Jaquindon Jackson, who is massive. He's a former quarterback. He's 6'3". Every single running back does something a little bit different. And I think for Liam Coen, that's extremely tantalizing, because it's this idea of, hey, how can I just completely shock the opposition with a different skill set with each running back that I trot out? Let's hit a couple more questions from you guys, which we really appreciate. Those of you who are listening live, this one's not even a question, but I think it's really interesting, especially after some of the film study that I did prior to today's conversation with Evan Closky. John says the Jags need a fullback. Interestingly enough, if you go back to that Chargers game, which again, in case you missed it, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Liam Coen as their play caller ran 13 personnel, aka multiple tight ends, 15 times in that matchup against Jesse Minter and the Chargers versus 23 times the previous 14 games. A, that is showing players over plays. B, it's showing an individualized strategy and game plan depending on who the opponent is, which we can't take for granted with some of the offensive organization that has taken place in this town in getting ready each and every week. But also I think it speaks to when you actually look at a couple of those plays where the Bucs were lined up in 13 personnel, they did have one of their tight ends lined up as a fullback. And that's where I'm really fascinated, because the previous regime here in Jacksonville did try to use Brenton Strange a time or two in the second half of the season at fullback, or at the very least it was floated in those coaches meetings. And now that Brenton Strange is assumedly going to be the primary pass catcher out of that room, knowing what Johnny Munt did with Kevin O'Connell, maybe he takes over that role. Quentin Morris is a massive dude. Certainly that's something he did a little bit in Buffalo too. I don't envision Hunter Long would be that fullback guy, but I do think, to your point, John, I do think you will see a little bit more of A, 13 personnel, but B, I think you'll see the tight ends or even maybe one of these running backs step in at that fullback position. Maybe not Mike Alstott, as John continued to comment in YouTube. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I do think that you will see a tight end, a running back potentially. And again, this is just based off what I've seen in film study of what Liam Coen and what Kevin O'Connell has done previously and knowing the players that exist in this ecosystem. All right, let's hit one from Dell. Dell noted that Sean McVay also ran more gap last season. And Dell asks, can our line run gap and power? It's a great question, Dell. You heard Evan at the end of that conversation note that he felt Robert Hainsey was at his best when he was running a gap scheme as opposed to the zone run game that certainly here in Jacksonville was at the forefront of the minds of the decision makers the last 3 years. And additionally was what Dave Canales wanted to run when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had the 31st or 32nd ranked run game, depending on what metric you look at back in 2023. And so I think that, yes, I think that this is going to be much like the defense will be a multiple front defense. I think that this run game is going to run a little bit of gap, a little bit of power, a little bit of zone here and there. I do think Evan brought up a really great point of the Bucs run game struggled when they were trying to run straight up the middle over Robert Hainsey. You certainly could make that same argument about what has occurred in Jacksonville here, not just with Luke Fortner and Mitch Morse the last 3 years, but even dating back to the days of Brandon Linder and Leonard Fournette running the ball straight up the gut, even in a day and age in which the run game is sexy again. Maybe not the best way of maximizing your personnel and their skill set. And I think you see, and that's even with Graham Barton being the starter in Tampa last year, when you go back and you watch Liam Coen, his offense in Tampa, they hardly ever run right up the middle, right up behind a center's behind. Like that doesn't really happen. And I think it's largely because Robert Hainsey and Graham Barton, for that matter, both can get out in space. And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a zone scheme. I think in gap, you're still moving and having to be agile while still operating in a phone booth of sorts. And so I think that you will be, at least from what we've seen. And again, I think the premise of today's episode is that while, yes, I don't believe the Jaguars offense in 2025 will absolutely mirror the offense of Tampa in 2024 under Liam Coen, what I do think will carry over is this idea of, okay, I am going to maximize this offense based upon the players that I have been handed. And therefore, it may look different. Liam Coen went to Tampa and said he wanted to run 11 personnel and quickly had to change. You can go back to Sean McVay's time in LA. He arrived in LA and he wanted to run more 13 personnel. They drafted Gerald Everett in the second round in 2017. They wanted to be a run first, ease the load on Jared Goff, play through your tight ends offense. And when Cooper Kupp emerged as an unheralded third round pick, all of a sudden they said, wow, we can run 11 personnel, and they adjusted. And I think that's what you're going to see under Liam Coen. That's the part that really will carry over from his time in Tampa up the road here to Jacksonville. Couple more. JTL wants to know why has Travis Hunter not signed his contract? I haven't heard anything on that front outside of the fact that, hey, Travis Hunter has been at practice, and Shamar Stewart, the 17th overall pick to the Cincinnati Bengals, who is currently unsigned as well. His rookie deal remains unsigned. He has not been at practice. So I think it's just a matter of fine-tuning some fine print. Ultimately, with the way that rookie contracts are structured right now, the fact that it's slot-based and it's literally like if you are drafted at 76th overall, this is the amount of money you're going to make. And while, yes, there's a couple different negotiating points that you and your representation could potentially try to maximize. It's not like there's a whole heck of a lot that like you can negotiate. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. He's on the field, he's at practice, he's in meetings, and that's the most important news if you're a Jaguars fan. Let's hit one more. I think this one's interesting from Reed. I'm chugging serious teal Kool-Aid on Hainsey and Coen. Not sure how they ever lose a game. I really appreciate that Evan said to me when we sat down to get ready for today's episode. He's like, I have a nugget for you from talking to a couple different offensive linemen this week. And so the fact that Graham Barton, who again, as Evan alluded to, is a pretty sharp cat, the fact that he went out of his way to say, hey, I would not have had as successful a rookie campaign if not for Robert Hainsey. I don't think that's lip service. What good does it do Graham Barton to be praising someone who's no longer in the building, who, if anything, is playing on an opposing team? And so that says to me that it really was a very meaningful role that Hainsey played, even if he was not the starter in 2024 in the Tampa offense. I also think it's really interesting that, Evan noted, and Liam, I guess, was very transparent about it. He was calling Robert Hainsey in the middle of the night. He wasn't calling Graham Barton. I don't know if he was calling Tristan Wirfs. I guess I should probably ask that of Tristan, but he was calling him and saying, hey, does this make sense? Does this protection make sense? Clearly a confidant of Liam Coen, and it makes absolute sense, therefore, why he followed him up the road here to Jacksonville. That does it for today's edition of Duval Rundown. We appreciate everybody who chimed in live, watching on YouTube and X. If you haven't watched a live show, 9:04 a.m., Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I do want to note this upcoming Monday, the Jaguars have shifted their practice schedule. They will actually be practicing at 9:04 a.m. And so Frank Frangie and I will probably fire up a podcast a little bit later in the day. We'll drop that Tuesday morning, but then Hayes Carline and I will be live next Wednesday, 9:04 a.m. We will actually continue to really look ahead a bit here, folks. If you want to tune in next Friday, already confirmed, Ben Gessling of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune is going to join us. We are going to look at Kevin O'Connell's transition from being a part of that Sean McVay tree, being his OC in LA, his transition as a first-year head coach 3 seasons ago with the Minnesota Vikings to now being considered a top 5, top 10 coach in the National Football League, and maybe something we can glean from that transition that maybe we will see with Liam Coen here in Duval County with the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the 1010XL Jaguars YouTube channel. And of course, all episodes of Duval Rundown, like all of our podcasts at 1010XL, are streamed live, or rather available on demand, I should say, at the 1010XL Podcast Network. We appreciate you guys hopping in with us. We will catch you on Monday.